May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. When my children were in elementary school, my daughter Maggie recorded a video that I want to tell you about. I should say first that Maggie was a very theatrical, exuberant 7-year-old. My son Peter was a much more introspective and cautious 10-year-old. They're not a whole lot different 9 years later. Now, Maggie loved recording videos of herself, and one January evening after Maggie had put on her pink pajamas for bed, I must have handed her my phone, and Maggie started recording. And as the video begins, you can hear that our answering machine has just picked up. Remember answering machines? That dates the story, right? And you see Maggie making these funny faces. She's doing that as she listens to her dad's voice on the outgoing message. She's saying, "Thank you for calling the MacPhail residence." And then you see Maggie just freeze as she hears, "Good evening. This is a message from Roanoke County Public Schools. Schools will be closed tomorrow due to continuing wintry conditions." Absolute delight breaks out over Maggie's face and her entire body. She dances and giggles and continues to record herself as she runs upstairs screaming, "School's canceled tomorrow!" Maggie runs into her big brother's room with this good news of great joy for all people. And Peter's first response is excitement, but then he stops and he says, "Wait, really?" Because you never know, little sisters pull pranks. And Maggie gets very serious and she nods and says, "Really? Yeah, they just called. Come down and ask Mommy." And then she runs down the stairs and stops recording. While preparing for this morning, thinking about Easter and our gospel lesson, I kept thinking about this video, which we watch every year, because the first time we get that call, it's the same voice it's always been. We have to watch the video again. Maggie's exuberant joy at the unexpected good news of a snow day, Peter's skepticism, Maggie's insistence, and her encouragement for Peter to come see for himself. We just heard a story about Jesus' friends and some unexpected good news. The women who went to Jesus' tomb early that first Easter morning were confused to find the stone rolled away and Jesus' body missing. And then 2 angelic men appear. The men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He's not here, but has risen." Death had been transformed into life. Jesus had risen from the dead. Now, as close companions of Jesus, these women knew about transformation. They had spent time with Jesus. He had changed their lives. He had turned their worlds upside down. They knew for themselves, and they had seen others experience healing where there had been sickness, freedom where there had been captivity, joy where there had been despair. They had even seen Jesus raise the dead. But now, grieving, they have come to the tomb to put the last period at the end of the Jesus story. Jesus was dead. He had a good run, but now it's over. Dead is dead. The women came to do for Jesus the things you did, to care for the bodies of those you loved after they died. But then these angels, or whatever they were, appeared at the tomb and told the women that dead is dead wasn't the story at all. "Remember how he told you that he would be crucified," they said, "and on the 3rd day rise again. Jesus told you that the true ending of his story would not be a period, but a comma, not an ending at all, but a new beginning. He would not be defeated in death, but would rise again on the 3rd day." And then the women did remember. They remembered what Jesus had said, and they went to tell the others. I so wish we knew more about the women's conversation that first Easter morning on their way from the empty tomb to find the men from their group. I wonder what they said. I wonder how they were transformed, how it felt as they walked and talked and remembered and began to believe this other story the story Jesus had told them, the story the angels told them, the story that God's love is stronger than death. We know that after the women remembered, they believed and they shared the good news. When they found the men, the women described to them what had just happened, what they saw, how the angels at the tomb told them that Jesus was risen and told them to remember what Jesus had said about his death and resurrection. The women shared this story with their friends who had also heard Jesus talk about crucifixion and resurrection, others who should also be able to remember and to believe. But the apostles didn't seem to remember. The women's words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. Were the apostles too traumatized and frightened by Jesus' death to remember and believe the good news of his resurrection? Had they lost faith that God's love could transform what seemed like utter defeat into victory? Whatever the reason, the matter, at least for then, was closed for them. Jesus was dead along with everything that he had stood for. In their fear and despair, the apostles believed the story that those in power often tell those who aren't, that Caesar and empire always win, that dead is dead, and that tombs that are sealed shut stay that way. Jesus had told his followers a different story. The angels and then the women told a different story, a story of the power of God's love and the call to remember who God is and what Jesus told them. Instead of death and defeat, Jesus and the angels and the women spoke of transformation and new life, of grief turned to hope, of promises fulfilled, of a love stronger than death. I like to think those women proclaimed the resurrection with at least as much joy as an exuberant second grader who's just heard that school is canceled tomorrow. But for all their joyful testimony, the men didn't believe them. They would get there, but not yet. The last little verse, though, gives us hope. Peter gets up and runs to the tomb to investigate. Peter may not completely believe the good news of the resurrection yet, but he's not so sure what he's hearing is nonsense either, and that's enough. That small opening offers enough room for Peter to wonder and remember and to go see for himself, to see whether this other story, the story of the power of God's love, could be true. When he looks in the tomb, Peter sees Jesus' burial wrappings inside, and Peter goes home amazed at what had happened. Later, the risen Christ would appear to Peter and to all the apostles and to many others. They would touch him and talk with him and eat with him. The risen Christ would remind them of all that he had told them, and they would remember and believe and proclaim the good news of the resurrection, proclaim this story of hope and new life and a love stronger than death. In faith and with joy, the apostles would turn toward Jerusalem, back to the place where Jesus was executed. They would defy fear. They would reject despair, confident in the message that Jesus Christ rose from the dead and that in the resurrection, God's love defeated death. They would share their faith in the power of God's love and the story of the risen Christ, and that faith would be passed down through generations and generations of people who would come to believe their testimony and be transformed by the power of the resurrection. Now, since that first Easter, and even way back before that, people, especially people without power or privilege or possessions, have been told the same old stories Jesus' disciples were hearing, that violence shows strength, that humility and compassion are weakness, that Caesar and empire always win, that love can't change things, and that dead is dead. Those stories can make us afraid and hopeless, and the powers of this world count on us believing them. But those who put their faith in the risen Christ have come to believe a different story. We believe the story that the angels told the women, and the women told the apostles, and the apostles told the world, that Jesus Christ is risen, that the love of God is stronger than death, and that relationship with God through the risen Christ brings abundant life, now and in the life to come, when we too will be raised from the dead. When we see and believe in the power of God's love, the shadows of despair and fear scatter in the light of the risen Christ. They are stones that God's love rolls away. They are tombs for the dead that God empties with resurrection and new life. This Easter, may the God whose love raised Jesus from the dead, whose love makes all things new, fill you with hope and faith and more joy than a second grader who just learned that tomorrow is a snow day, so that we may proclaim with the angels and the women, with the apostles and the faithful in every generation, Alleluia, Christ is risen.
Amen. He is risen indeed.
Amen.
Continuing on page 9, I invite you to stand as you are able, and together let us affirm